Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Love this topic. Got a little weepy today. Let's get it. What's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life? Here's my vote right here. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Camping in the mountains in Colorado. We were all sitting around a campfire enjoying the meal of fish we'd caught. Into the ring of light from the fire, we saw a feline cub walk into the camp. Some of us had to restrain others from trying to get involved, but we got everybody out of range of the fire. Moments later, a mountain lion mother strolled in, grabbed the cub by the scruff of its neck with its teeth, and casually walked out. When we returned to fireside, nobody said a word for a good 20 minutes. Whether it was fear from the mountain lion being nearby, or just the majestic encounter, doesn't matter. It was the coolest thing we'd ever seen. A mother came for her cub, took it home. My wife isn't much of a swimmer, and certainly not much of a snorkeler. I saved up for 5 years so I could take my family to Maui. I wanted them to go to the same place I went as a kid, but my dad had a lot more money than I do. Also, it was $300 a night back then. It's $850 a night now. On the last day, my wife decided to snorkel as well. I'd been taking my young daughters out for a few days, so they were doing well. We decided to go all at once as a family. We were holding hands, the four of us in a chain, and snorkeling out in Napoli Bay. And as if my magic was on cue, this huge sea turtle swam right below us and started resting or futzing around below us. We were all so excited. He was so gorgeous. Through the emerald clear water with the surface reflection on his shell, we were all freaking out at that moment. That singular moment with my beautiful wife, my beautiful daughters, in that beautiful place that I worked so hard to get us to. That singular moment was the most beautiful, perfect moment of my entire life. And as a focal point, if that moment, that turtle was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Maybe a decade ago, me and a group of friends were night tripping. Around dawn, after everything was starting to get less trippy, we went to sit on the benches at a local park to decompress from the night shenanigans and saw the purest, most beautiful thing. A little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, came with her grandmother. Her grandma was already tired and just sat on the swing and watched her girl play on the slides. After a few goes, the little girl called to her grandma to come play with her. Grandma said she'd love to, but her knees hurt, but that it made her happy seeing her playing and enjoying herself. This beautiful little angel says, "You make me happy. I'll come sit next to you, and we could be happy together." It was so small, but getting to just be there for such a sweet, innocent, genuinely beautiful moment, this little girl with boundless energy, so happy just getting to be with her grandmother. She had the whole playground to herself, but sat with her grandmother just chatting and swaying, not even swinging for a while. And it was everything. Not seen, but what it is human connection. The time I've spent with my dad, my friends, or even strangers who I've interacted with. When you have an honest and deep communication and experience with someone, it comes as close to a spiritual, sacred moment there is. My dad and I went to a ball game together, then came home and ate at a local restaurant. He said to me, "This was one of the best steaks I've ever had." Now that's not some deep emotional epiphany, right? But I could cry like a little French schoolgirl here recalling the moment. We had such a great day together, and I miss him so. I spent a semester studying abroad in Chile, and at the end of it, I took a solo trip to Torre del Paine, love it, National Park in Argentina. I went on a 5-day hike by myself, carrying everything I needed for the whole trip. Just about every moment of that trip was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. But the most amazing moment was on day 3 or 4. I hiked up a long side trail. Eventually, the path gave way to just bare rocks, but I kept going next to the ridge. As I crested the top, there was a glacier lake in the valley below that was the most unreal sapphire blue. It had perfect concentric rings of ice drifting out from where the glacier had calved into it. I sat there for an hour or two before I could bring myself to leave. The combination of isolation, peacefulness, beauty, and tranquility was unrivaled. It's a perfect place. I was in Tierra del Fuego in the late 90s and went up to Torre del Paine, walked on the glaciers, so this was a nice reminiscent trip down memory lane. I'd love to get back there someday. Beautiful part of the world. I was fortunate enough to look around Notre Dame while Mass was in session 4 days before it caught fire. Everything about the place made me think I was witnessing the pinnacle of beauty. How high the ceilings were, the sound of the singers and the organ playing, the way the sun hit the stained glass, the architecture of the place. I still think it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've had. I'd have to say my first AFF skydive up in Michigan. I was in a queue for a long time waiting for instructors and was lucky enough to get on the last load before sunset. The view on the plane ride up was so beautiful that I almost forgot I was about to jump out of a plane. Freefall had so much going on that I didn't have time to notice much, too focused on falling correctly, lol. But once I was under canopy, it was such a beautiful and serene experience. I went from the intense thrill and loud roar of freefall to the peaceful and quiet canopy ride down. There's nothing below me, and I can see the ground a few thousand feet below all lit up in the soft, warm light of sunset. I'm sure all the brain chemicals help the experience. My first dive I ever did in my life, in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, getting to the bottom of the seafloor, then looking straight up. I've never felt so at peace with myself, everything around me. It was probably the closest I've ever felt to something spiritual in my life. I just wanted to lay there. If I died right there and then, everything would have been okay. It's weird thinking I was just looking up toward the sunlight from the bottom of the sea and had that powerful feeling. Just thinking about it now makes me super emotional. I used to work in rural Alaska. I had a partner who I spent the majority of my time out there with. We would fly to around the states for weeks, visiting as many villages as we could to do our service. Early in our career, we walked out into the dump of a small village to watch the Aurora Borealis. Like we had planned this shit out to the minute, trying to figure out when the best time would be to see the colors in the air. That was effing beautiful. Years later, we're older and tired. The novelty of the bush has worn off. We get a call on the radio that there's a bear in the village. I step outside in a thermal and long johns, and I'm greeted by the most brightest and loudest aurora I've ever seen. I took to my right, and there's a snowmobile chasing a grizzly down the main road. My partner comes up beside me and is just blown away as I was. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. This is going to be a bit tricky to describe, but I doubt anything will ever surpass it for me. So, when I was a kid, I had a bedroom that looked out to the east. I was an early bird, and this meant I could wake up with the sun, which I loved. The window was right next to my bed, too, so I could look out and enjoy the early morning peacefulness from my bed. Anyway, one morning I woke up early as per usual, and sunlight was coming through my thin-ass curtains as per usual. So I looked through the curtains, and I saw what I can only describe as an upside-down golden desert plastered against the sky. What I mean by this is that some weird cloud formation was being hit by the sun just right, and it created this absolutely gorgeous oasis, stretching as far as I could see. It looked like a massive rolling desert, made up of powdered gold with these huge, perfect rolling dunes and everything. My description doesn't do it any justice. When I saw this thing, it looked effing biblical. I just stared at it, speechless, for like 5 minutes, and then tried to take some photos of it. The photos were garbage though. I was using an iPad. So I just continued to stare at this golden soft desert, and like 5 minutes later it just naturally broke apart and drifted away. I cannot emphasize enough how incomprehensibly spectacular this thing looked. It did not look like clouds being hit by sunlight. It genuinely looked like this gargantuan golden desert of colossal proportions. I've never ever seen any view that's come even close to it since. And I've seen some pretty effing gorgeous views. I'm an atheist and all, but if I wasn't, I think God was speaking directly to me. It was to date and probably always the most mind-numbingly beautiful thing I've ever seen. You described it perfectly. And sometimes pictures, even if you had the best camera in the world, wouldn't even do it justice. So
you had that moment and it's with you. So thanks.
This might seem odd, and I think other things might take the cake now, but the first thing that comes to mind was about 2 years after moving out of my parents' house, and I caught myself smiling in a window reflection. It caught my eye, and I stopped just to admire it for a second. I wasn't smiling for any particular reason, but I realized in that moment, after years of living in an abusive household and many more months of therapy, I was seeing myself give a real smile for the first time I could remember. None of the fake stuff or smiling nervously. I can't see through someone else's eyes, so I never caught those rare moments when I just smiled because I felt good or found something funny. I gained a lot more self-love that day, just being able to see my happiness on the outside and not just feel it. Besides seeing my kids for the first time, LOL, I was super high, just weed gas, and driving down to Ocean Drive in Newport, Rhode Island. It's a windy road, so I'm driving slow, hitting my vape pen and enjoying the beautiful sun shining while listening to Breathe by Pink Floyd. As soon as breathe in the air, don't be afraid to care, blasted into my ears, the ocean came into view. The water was the most beautiful sea green I've ever seen. The waves were glorious. I actually said "whoa" out loud in the car by myself, and I've been chasing that high ever since, LOL. My daughter's first smile. I had an extremely rough pregnancy, overlapped and followed by PPD. Giving birth was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, and the hospital stay and recovery period after left me not much more than a shell of a human. I took care of my daughter for months, but I didn't feel any real connection to her. She was a responsibility, not really my baby, until she smiled at me. It was like things started clicking. We started clicking, and I was more than just a mother. I was hers. I knew what she was saying in her own way, and suddenly there was a reason for everything we had been through. I've seen so many beautiful sights, from the entire Milky Way in the desert to the bioluminescent at the beach, sunrise in the mountains and sunsets in the Keys, sand dunes and sunsets in the Middle East, greenery of Ireland, and the brown of the Southwest. I've had the privilege to see 2 children born. One was my son and one wasn't, but nothing trumps the sight of a child taking its first breath and hearing the first cry to know it's going to be a fighter. It's not so much the sight as it is the feeling, the sound, the experience of human being getting its first full lung full of air and crying out loud. What will this child do? Who will they be? What hope do we have in this most innocent creature? I've seen a lot in my years, but the hopes and dreams of babies' first cries will move you like nothing else. Night skydiving. It's a requirement for a more advanced license, so big drop zones will organize night jump events a few times a year. I volunteered to pull relatively high. You need to space out the parachute deployment altitudes to help avoid collisions when it's dark, and it was incredible. I was just there, suspended in the sky with city lights sprawled out for miles below me. The stars were gorgeous that night too, perfectly clear sky. It felt like floating in a lake of starlight. I don't have words. I've done many night jumps since, but my first was the most beautiful. It was a sunrise. I'd been going through a lot at the time, wasn't sleeping well. Early one morning, after not being able to sleep, I went to the beach and sat down and just listened to the waves. The sun started coming up out of the ocean. It was huge as it rose out of the horizon. I was watching the sky slowly change colors when this old man walking on the beach stopped near me. "How's it going?" he asked. "All right, I guess." He looked at the sunrise and said, "Well, it's a new day," and walked off. That sunrise gave me hope.
It's not just a sunrise. I remember a long time ago, Brendan Lee, was Bruce Lee's son, died, and he did an interview before he died on set, and he said, talking about his character, that nothing is trivial. And he said, how many sunrises have you ever seen in your life? And we take these things for granted, so don't. It's amazing. So, great.
Canyonlands National Park. I remember hiking there with my family, and we were in front of this big rock thing around dusk, and there was a lot of people there. On the other side of the rocks, we could hear somebody playing a horn or instrument of some kind. My parents went ahead to see it better, while me and my brother hung back to the rest. I remember sitting there just taking in the moment. I don't know if anybody else has ever experienced this, but it was just so strangely beautiful and odd that it's hard to put to words. Like one of those things where you just have to be there to understand it.